Come close now, children of the red clay earth. Sit by this fire that never dies, for I am the old one who carries many names, the one who heard the cries crossing the wide ocean in the middle passage, who felt the hot iron on flesh before I was even born. My hair white as cotton picked by force, my voice hoarse as the creak of chains that never fully loosened. Listen now, for this here's true story. Story that still bleeds in the veins of our people. Her name was Dinah of the Coffin, the slave woman locked in a wooden box for 35 nights, who buried the master alive. This ain't written in no white man's books, ain't on no museum plaques, but it lives in the wind that still blows through cotton fields, lives in the cry of mothers who never saw their children again, lives in the memory that Georgia's red earth drank and never forgot. The old ones warned us, some stories don't die when folks pass on. They root deep like sweetgrass in the lowlands, like cypress in the bayou. And this here story, Lord have mercy, this one's got roots that reach straight down to the ancestors. Now you see, people, what I'm about to tell you happened in them days of deep sorrow, when the sun burned like punishment and cotton grew like a curse. In the quiet of the quarters at night, when even the whip-poor-wills knew to hush their song, the old folks would whisper about the children stolen before they could walk, about names erased like footprints in red clay after rain. Dinah's story began that way, with an erasure, with a severing, with a wound that never closed proper. She was born somewhere forgotten in South Carolina, or maybe Georgia. Them lines didn't matter much when your whole world was measured by how far masses land stretched. Her mama, they say, was tall and dark as a moonless night, with eyes that held secrets from across the water. Strong-backed woman she was, powerful strong, the kind that sang work songs with such sorrow it made even the overseer look away, just for a second, for his heart remembered it wasn't supposed to feel nothing. The child, she who would become Dinah, had another name first, African name. Name her mama whispered into her tiny ear soon as she came squalling into this world of bondage. But that name got buried the day the auction block swallowed her mama whole. Lord of glory that day, that terrible day when the sun beat down on Charleston's market square and human souls stood lined up like cattle. The girl child couldn't have been more than 6 summers old, clinging to her mama's worn skirt, not understanding why white men walked around poking and prodding, lifting lips to check teeth, squeezing arms to test strength. The auctioneer's voice rang out like a devil's sermon. Fine breeding wench, strong as an ox, good hips for bearing more property. Her mama, that fierce suffering creature, she didn't cry, didn't beg, just held her daughter close one last time and whispered something in that old tongue, words from the other side of the water, words that sounded like prayer and curse mixed together. Then rough hands pulled them apart. The child screamed till her throat bled raw, screamed till sound became silence, screamed till her soul learned what slavery truly meant, that love itself could be sold for silver coins. The white man who bought her mama disappeared into the crowd, heading toward the rice plantations of the lowlands. The child never saw her again. Not in this life, anyway. But folks swear on their lives that sometimes, in the deep hours when spirits walk, you can still hear that mama's voice carrying on the wind, singing them African songs, calling for the baby she lost. The girl child got bought by a man named Harlan. Mr. Robert Harlan, they called him, though Mr. was too kind a word for what he was. He owned a plantation some miles inland, where cotton fields stretched so far they seemed to swallow the horizon. Big House stood like a white tomb with its columns and its cruelty. Behind it, the slave quarters, cabanas de madera, rough timber cabins with dirt floors and gaps in the walls wide enough to let winters bite through. "What's this one called?" Harlan asked the previous owner, a skinny man with tobacco-stained teeth. "Ain't got no proper Christian name yet, sir. Her mama kept calling her some heathen thing." Harlan looked down at the trembling child, her eyes still swollen from crying, her small body shaken like a leaf in November wind. He smiled, but it wasn't no kind smile. It was the smile of a man who saw property, not people. "We'll call her Dinah," he said. "Simple name, biblical. These Nigras need good Christian names if they gonna serve proper. And just like that, the name her mama gave her, the name that connected her to ancestors, to the other side of the water, to a lineage of queens and warriors. That name got buried deeper than any grave. Dinah she became. Dinah she would remain. But deep inside, in that place where memory lives even when words die, she still carried that first name. Carried it like a secret, like a promise, like a seed waiting for the right soil to bloom. The plantation swallowed her up. She grew there, in that place of endless labor and casual cruelty. The cotton fields became her classroom, the whipping post her reminder, the quarters her only refuge. She learned quick, had to survive. Learned to move invisible like when Massa walked by. Learned to keep her eyes down. Learned that yes sir and no sir could be the difference between eatin' and starvin', between sleepin' and sufferin'. But she also learned other things. Things the old folks taught in whispers. Things about root work and conjure, about how to read signs in nature, how to know when rain was coming by watching the way moss grew on trees. She learned about the hush harbor deep in the woods, where folks snuck away at night to worship the way they wanted, not the way Massa's preacher told them to. She learned about the North Star, that drinking gourd in the sky that pointed toward freedom. She learned, too, about rage, about how it could burn slow and steady, like coals under ash, waiting for the right moment to burst into flame. By the time Dinah reached 14 summers, she'd grown into herself. Tall, like her mama. Dark-skinned with features that spoke of Africa, high cheekbones, full lips, eyes that seemed to look right through you. The older women in the quarters called her handsome girl, which was both blessing and curse. In them days of deep sorrow, beauty could be a weapon used against you. Mr. Harlan noticed. Oh yes, he noticed. His wife had passed some years back. Fever took her, though some folks whispered it was loneliness that really did it. Married to a man cold as January ground. Since then, Harlan had changed. Got meaner, got hungrier. Started looking at his slave women different. Started believing that ownership extended beyond labor, into flesh, into the most private parts of a person's being. One afternoon, Dinah was scrubbing the floors of the big house. The mistress was long dead, but the house still needed tending. She was on her knees with a brush and bucket, sweat dripping down her back when she felt it, that prickling sensation on her neck that meant someone was watching. She looked up slow, and there he stood, Mr. Harlan, leaning against the doorframe, whiskey glass in hand, eyes fixed on her like a hawk studying prey. "You sure grew up fine, Dinah," he said, voice thick and slow. Real fine. Her heart started beating like African drums in her chest. She knew that tone. Every slave woman knew that tone. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, eyes back down, scrubbing harder. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She lifted her eyes. His face wore that smile again. That same smile from years back when he'd named her. But now it carried something else, something darker, something that made her skin crawl. "You know," he continued, stepping closer, "a man gets lonely in a house this big. A man needs companionship." Dinah's hands froze on the brush. The water in the bucket rippled with her trembling. In the quarters at night, the women talked about this. About masters who took what they wanted. About the babies born with light skin and broken hearts. About the choicelessness of it all. "Sir," she said carefully, "I got work to finish. Work can wait." He took another step. The floorboards creaked under his weight. "I've been watching you, Dinah. You're different from the others. You got fire in you. I like that." And there, under his gaze, Dinah learned something else. She learned that sometimes the only power you got left is the power to say no, even when saying no might cost you everything. "Sir," she said again, voice steadier now, lifting herself up from her knees to stand full height. "I respectfully ask that you let me finish my work." His smile vanished. His eyes went cold. "You ask?" His voice dropped to a whisper more dangerous than any shout. "You don't ask me nothing, girl. You belong to me, every inch of you." The silence that fell was thick as molasses, heavy as chains. Dinah's soul trembled, but she held his stare, held it like her life depended on it, held it like her mama would have wanted. Finally, Harlan laughed, a sound without humor. "We'll see about that fire," he said, turning to leave. "We'll see how long it burns." And as his footsteps echoed down the hall, Dinah knew deep in her bones, in that place where truth lives before words can name it, that she'd just marked herself. That refusal had planted seeds of something terrible, that in Mr. Robert Harlan's twisted mind, she'd just become a challenge, a thing to be broken. And there, under the afternoon light filtering through the big house windows, Dinah learned that no was a word that could cost you your life. That night, Dinah walked back to the quarters with legs that felt like they'd forgotten how to carry weight. The path from the big house wound through the cotton fields, past the whipping tree where Spanish moss hung like gray ghosts, past the well where women drew water and whispered prayers nobody was supposed to hear. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky blood red, and folks swear on their lives that kind of sunset always means trouble coming. Sister Ruth was waiting by the cabin door. Old wise one she was, maybe 60 summers, maybe more. Hard to tell when suffering ages you faster than time. Her face was lined deep as creek beds after drought, but her eyes still held light. She took one look at Dinah and knew. "He touched you?" Ruth asked, voice low. "No, ma'am." "But he looked at me that way." Ruth's jaw tightened. She pulled Dinah inside the cabin, cramped space with dirt floor and a single window, home to 6 souls who slept on corn shuck mattresses and shared one thin blanket between them. The others were still in the fields, squeezing the last drops of daylight for Massa's profit. "Child," Ruth said, sitting Dinah down on an overturned bucket. "Listen close now. When a master starts looking that way, ain't but 3 paths. You submit, you run, or you resist. And each one comes with its own kind of damnation." Dinah's hands shook in her lap. "I can't. Sister Ruth, I can't be his. I won't." "Then you better pray harder than you ever prayed before. 'Cause men like Harlan, cruel overseer of his own twisted kingdom, they don't take kindly to refusal. They see it as insult, as rebellion." Ruth leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "But there are ways, child. Old ways. Ways the ancestors taught us." She reached under her mattress and pulled out a small pouch, worn leather tied with twine. Inside was what looked like dried roots, some kind of powder, and a few small bones. "This here's a mojo hand," Ruth explained. "For protection. You keep it on your body under your clothes where nobody can see, and you pray over it every night. Ask the ancestors for strength. Ask them to cloud his mind, to turn his attention elsewhere." Dinah took the pouch with trembling fingers. It felt warm, like it held something alive. "Will it work?" she whispered. Ruth's face grew solemn. "Root work ain't magic, child. It's faith mixed with knowledge, mixed with the power of our people who came before. But it only works if you believe strong enough. And even then..." She trailed off, staring at nothing. "Even then, sometimes evil is just too powerful for any conjure to stop. Sometimes all we can do is survive." That night, Dinah barely slept. She lay on her corn shuck bed, the mojo bag pressed against her chest, listening to the sounds of the quarters, snoring, Coffin, the soft crying of a woman whose baby had been sold away last week. Through the gaps in the cabin walls, she could see stars. Could see that drinking gourd pointing north. Freedom up there somewhere, so far away it might as well have been in heaven itself. In them days of deep sorrow, every sunrise brought new ways to break the spirit. Dinah learned this truth intimately as weeks turned to months. She continued her work in the big house, cleaning, cooking, serving, all the while feeling Harlan's eyes on her like hands that hadn't touched yet but promised to. The big house itself was a strange place. Grand on the outside with its white columns and fine drapery, but inside it stank of secrets and stale air. Dinah heard things while she worked, heard Harlan arguing with his bookkeeper about debts, heard him bragging to visitors about his stock, referring to human beings like they were cattle. Heard him drinking late at night, cursing his dead wife, cursing the slaves, cursing God himself. One morning, while she was blacking the stove in the kitchen, the overseer came through. Man named Pike, mean driver with a face like spoiled meat and a whip that never rested. He didn't speak to her, just looked her up and down the way men do when they're calculating value, then walked on. But his presence left the air heavy, like before a storm. "That one's worse than Massa himself," whispered Clara, another house slave. Simple-minded girl, some said, but Dinah knew better. Clara just knew how to play dumb to survive. "Pike's been whipping folks for the smallest things lately. Yesterday he took John to the post just for looking tired." Dinah had seen the aftermath. John's back was laid open like plowed earth, blood mixing with sweat. They'd carried him back to the quarters and laid him face down while the women applied poultices of tobacco and spider webs to slow the bleeding. He'd screamed through the night, not just from pain, but from the knowledge that tomorrow he'd have to be back in the fields, torn flesh and all, or face another whipping for laziness. This was the rhythm of plantation life, suffering something terrible from sunup to sundown. The cotton fields stretched endless, row after row after row, plants heavy with white bolls that had to be picked clean. Your fingers would bleed from the sharp husks. Your back would scream from bending. But you kept going because the alternative was the whipping post or worse, being sold away, split from whatever family you still had left. But even in hell, folks found ways to hold on to their humanity. In the evenings after the day's labor, the quarters came alive in small, precious ways. There'd be quiet singing, work songs that sounded mournful but carried coded messages about escape routes and safe houses. There'd be the old folks telling stories, keeping the memory of Africa alive through tales of Anansi the spider and the animal tricksters who outwitted the powerful. There'd be young couples sneaking glances, falling in love despite the knowledge that Massa could separate them with a single sail. And there was the Hush Harbor. Deep in the woods, maybe half a mile from the quarters, past the creek where water ran clear over red stones, there was a clearing. Folks called it the Hush Harbor, secret church, hidden from white eyes. On certain nights when the moon was slim and darkness was thick, small groups would slip away. They'd place wet quilts on the ground to muffle sound, and they'd worship the way their souls needed to worship. Not the stiff, judgmental God that Massa's preacher talked about on Sundays, the one who supposedly blessed slavery. No, this was the God of Exodus, the God who parted waters and freed captives, the God who heard the cries of the oppressed and answered with thunder. Dinah went to Hush Harbor whenever she could risk it. She'd sit in that circle of believers and let the spirituals wash over her. "Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." The old ones said that song had double meaning. On the surface, it was about baptism. But underneath, it was instructions for runaways. Wade in the water so the dogs can't track your scent. Follow the river north. God's gonna trouble the water for you, part it like he did for Moses. One night at Hush Harbor, a man spoke. Name was Solomon, strong-backed man who worked the fields, but whose eyes held fire. He tried to run once, got caught, got branded with an R for runaway on his cheek. But his spirit wasn't broken. "The Lord sees our bondage," Solomon said, voice rising with passion. "He sees every lash, every tear, every family torn apart. And just like he delivered the Israelites from Egypt, he's gonna deliver us too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but deliverance is coming. You hear me? It's coming." Folks called out "Amen" and "Yes, Lord," with tears streaming down their faces. In that moment, in that hidden place, they were free, just for a moment. But moments don't last. It was a Saturday afternoon in late summer when Harlan cornered Dinah in the cellar. She'd been sent down to fetch preserves for supper, and she was reaching for a jar on the high shelf when she heard the door close behind her. Her blood went cold. "Dinah," his voice came from the shadows. He'd been drinking. She could smell the whiskey thick in the air. "We need to have a conversation." She turned slow, keeping the shelf at her back, the jar clutched in her hands like it might protect her somehow. "Sir," she said carefully, I got work too. Always work, ain't it? He stepped closer. In the dim light filtering through the cellar's small window, his face looked like something carved from wax, pale and wrong. You been avoiding me, girl. Acting like you don't hear me when I call. Acting like you're too good for what I'm offering. Sir, I don't mean no disrespect. Don't lie to me. His voice exploded in the small space. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, slamming his palm against the shelf beside her head. Jars rattled. Dust fell. I own you, Dinah. Every inch, every breath. You understand that? The mojo bag Ruth had given her burned against her chest like a live coal. Dinah's heart was hammering so hard, she thought it might crack her ribs. But she met his eyes. Met them with all the strength her mama had left her, all the defiance her ancestors whispered in her blood. You own my body, sir, she said quietly, but my soul, that's mine and God's, and I won't give it willing. His face twisted. For a moment, just a moment, she saw him clearly. Not a powerful master, but a pitiful soul. A man so empty inside he thought he could fill himself by consuming others. Then his hand shot out, grabbed her chin, fingers digging hard enough to bruise. You're testing me, girl, he whispered, face so close she could feel his breath, sour with alcohol and rot. You're testing my patience, and let me tell you something. I am not a patient man. He held her there for what felt like hours but was probably just seconds. Then, with a sound of disgust, he shoved her back and turned away. Get out, he said. Get out, for I do something we'll both regret. Dinah ran up them cellar stairs, through the kitchen, out the back door, down the path toward the quarters. She didn't stop running till she was back in her cabin, collapsed on her bed, shaking all over like she had fever. Sister Ruth found her there an hour later, still trembling. Without a word, the old woman pulled her close, let her cry against her shoulder. He's gonna break you if he can, Ruth whispered. Massa always breaks what resists him. But listen to me, child. Listen close. Sometimes being broken is how you stay alive long enough to be free. But Dinah didn't want to be broken. Couldn't stomach the thought of submitting, of letting him take what wasn't freely given. That night she prayed harder than ever. Prayed to the God of the Hush Harbor, to the ancestors who crossed the water, to any spirit listening. And maybe something was listening, because 3 days later, word spread through the plantation like wildfire. Harlan had ordered something strange built out back of the quarters. The carpenter, an old enslaved man named Isaac, came back from the work site with fear in his eyes. What is it? Folks asked. What's he building? Isaac shook his head, voice barely a whisper. It's a box, he said. A wooden box, big enough to hold a person, with a lock. The quarters fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Harlan was preparing a punishment, something special, something terrible. And though nobody said her name out loud, everyone's eyes found Dinah. At night, in the heavy darkness, she could hear the sound of hammering, nails driving into wood, building her tomb while she still breathed. She lay awake, the mojo bag pressed to her heart, and knew the confrontation was coming, the reckoning, the moment when refusal would meet its price. And in the shadows just outside her cabin, Harlan passed by, stopped, looked toward her window. His voice drifted through the cracks in the wall, soft as poison. You'll be mine, Dinah, one way or another, even if I have to bury your pride 6 feet deep to get there. The hammering stopped on the 4th night. That silence was worse than the sound had been, like the moment before thunder cracks the sky open. In the quarters, folks moved quiet, spoke in whispers, cast glances toward Dinah that held pity and fear mixed together. They knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The only question was when. Sunday came with its forced ritual. Massa's preacher, a thin white man with spectacles and a Bible he wielded like a weapon, stood before the assembled slaves and spoke of obedience, of servants obeying masters, of the curse of Ham, of how slavery was God's will, written plain in scripture for those with eyes to see. Dinah sat in the back, jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Sister Ruth beside her whispered low, "Don't let him see your face, child. Don't let him see what you thinking. But Harlan saw, he always saw. From his place in the front row, separated from his property by wooden pews that marked the division of worlds, he kept turning around. His eyes found hers across that crowded praise house, and in them she saw something that made her blood run cold. Not just desire anymore. Rage. Pure, burning rage at being denied what he believed was his by right and law. After the sermon, as folks filed out into the bright morning, Harlan approached. Pike the overseer walked beside him, mean driver with his whip coiled at his belt like a snake ready to strike. "Dinah," Harlan said, voice too pleasant, too controlled. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Sister Ruth's hand squeezed Dinah's arm. A warning, a prayer, a goodbye maybe. Then Dinah stepped forward, following the two white men away from the praise house toward the cotton fields where the sun beat down merciless, and the earth held witness to countless sufferings. They walked in silence for a time. Dinah's heart was beating like African drums in her chest, fast, urgent, ancestral. The mojo bag Ruth had given her seemed to pulse against her skin, warm and alive with whatever power the old woman had conjured into it. Finally, at the edge of the field where nobody else could hear, Harlan stopped, turned. His face was red from sun or anger, hard to tell which. "I've been patient with you," he began, voice low and dangerous. "Lord have mercy. I've been more patient than any master should be, given you time to come to your senses, to understand your place." Dinah kept her eyes down, hands clasped in front of her. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Pike stood behind her, blocking any escape. The cotton field stretched endless on all sides. No cover, no refuge. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." She lifted her eyes, met his stare with something she hadn't meant to show, defiance. Pure, unmistakable defiance. Harlan's jaw tightened. "You think you're special, don't you? Think you're better than the others? That high and mighty look in your eyes, I'm gonna break that. Break it till there's nothing left but obedience." "Sir," Dinah heard herself say, voice steadier than her trembling hands. "I never said I was better than nobody, but what you want from me, I can't give it. Won't give it." The word hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that couldn't be put out. Won't. Not can't, which might have been forgiven as weakness, but won't, which was rebellion, pure and simple. Pike whistled low. "Uppity one, ain't she?" Harlan's face had gone from red to white. His hands were shaken, not with fear but with fury barely contained. When he spoke again, his voice was soft as falling ash and twice as deadly. "You know what happens to slaves who refuse their masters. You know what the law allows me to do." "Yes, sir," Dinah whispered. "But the law don't change what's right in God's eyes. And God sees everything, sir, even what happens in the dark." For a moment, just one breathless moment, she thought he might strike her right there. His hand rose, fingers curled into a fist. Pike stepped closer, eager-like, hungry for violence the way some men hunger for bread. But then Harlan lowered his hand. A smile spread across his face, but it wasn't a smile at all. It was a baring of teeth. "God sees everything," he repeated, mocking. "You believe that? You really believe some invisible God up in the sky cares about what happens to Nigras down here in the dirt?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Then let's see if your God can hear you from inside a box." The words hit like a physical blow. Dinah felt her knees go weak, but she locked them, refused to fall. Pike laughed, cruel, barking sound that scattered birds from nearby trees. "That's right," Harlan continued, circling her now like a predator. "I had something special built just for you. A teaching tool, you might say, to help you understand your place, to help you learn what happens when property gets ideas above its station." "Please." The word escaped before Dinah could stop it. "Please?" Harlan stopped circling, leaned close. "Now you want to say please? Too late for that, girl. You had your chance to make this easy, to be willing, but you chose the hard way. So now..." He gestured toward the quarters, toward whatever waited there. "Now you gonna learn what refusal costs." A boy appeared then, young field hand named Jacob, maybe 12 summers old. He looked terrified, eyes wide as a spooked horse. Massa Harlan, sir, Jacob stammered. That thing you wanted built, it's ready. Harlan's smile widened. He turned back to Dinah, and in his eyes she saw something worse than anger, worse than lust. She saw satisfaction, the satisfaction of a man about to break something beautiful just because he could. Good, Harlan said. Take her. Pike grabbed Dinah's arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. She tried to pull away, but he was strong. Overseer's strength built from years of violence. He dragged her back toward the quarters, Harlan following behind, Jacob running ahead to spread the word. By the time they reached the open space behind the cabins, a crowd had gathered. Slaves pulled from their Sunday rest, forced to witness. This was how Massa taught lessons, public, brutal, memorable. The old ones looked away, unable to bear it. The young ones watched with horror growing in their eyes, learning early what the price of resistance was. And there, in the center of the crowd, was the box. Lord of Glory, the sight of it. Wooden coffin, rough-hewn but sturdy, big enough to hold a grown person if they curled tight. Iron lock on the lid, already half buried in red Georgia clay, the top still exposed. Just looking at it made Dinah's chest tighten, made breath come shallow and fast. This here, Harlan announced to the assembled crowd, voice ringing out like a preacher's, is what happens when you forget your place. When you think you got the right to refuse. When you act like you're free when you ain't nothing but property. Pike shoved Dinah forward. She stumbled, caught herself, stood trembling before that terrible box. Sister Ruth was in the crowd, tears streaming down her weathered face. Solomon stood rigid, fists clenched, rage burning in his branded face. All around, her people, suffering creatures, strong souls, fellow prisoners, watched helpless. Harlan stepped close to Dinah one last time, whispered so only she could hear, 35 nights in the dark, Dinah. 35 nights to think about what you refused. And when I let you out, if you survive, you'll be begging to give me what I want, begging on your knees. Then louder for everyone to hear, get her in. Pike's hands were rough as tree bark when they grabbed her shoulders and forced her down. Dinah fought. Lord knows she fought, kicking and twisting like a wild thing. But he was strong and she was already weakened by fear. Her knees hit the edge of the box first, then her hands scraped against the rough wood as they pushed her inside. The smell hit her immediate. Fresh-cut pine mixed with the damp earth scent of the grave. The box was small, so small her shoulders touched both sides when she tried to sit up. She couldn't stand, couldn't stretch out full, could only curl herself into a position that already made her muscles ache. And this was just the beginning. Please. The word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Please, Massa, I'll... Too late for begging, Harlan said, standing above the box, his figure blocking out the sun. You made your choice, Dinah, now live with it. Or die with it. Don't much matter to me which. Around them, the crowd was silent. Scared to death to speak, to move, to do anything that might bring this same fate upon themselves. But Dinah could feel their prayers, silent, urgent, rising up like smoke from a hidden fire. Sister Ruth was praying out loud now, voice barely a whisper but carrying on the hot Georgia wind. Lord Jesus, cover this child. Cover her with your protection. Let the ancestors watch over her. The lid came down slow. Dinah watched it descend like a sunset she'd never see again. The last glimpse of sky, of light, of the world of the living. She saw Harlan's face one more time, twisted with satisfaction and cruelty. Then darkness. Complete, suffocating darkness. The sound of the lid settling into place was like a door slamming on hope itself. Then came the nails. Bang, 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 each one driving through wood, sealing her in, marking her tomb. She counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time they finished, there must have been 20 nails holding that lid down tight. Then came the lock. She heard it click into place. Iron tongue sliding into iron mouth, a marriage of metal meant to last until death did them part. 35 nights, Harlan's voice came muffled through the wood. Count 'em, Dinah, and think about what you refused. Think about how much easier it could have been. Then footsteps, walking away. The crowd dispersing, forced back to their cabins, their labor, their own private hells. And Dinah was alone. The silence inside the box was its own kind of torture. Her breathing sounded too loud, too fast, echoing in the small space. She could feel panic rising in her chest like floodwater, threatening to drown her from the inside. Her hands flew to the lid, pushing, shoving, scraping with her nails until they split and bled. But the wood didn't give, didn't even creak. It was solid, final, unmovable as judgment. "Help!" she screamed. "Somebody help me!" But there was nobody to hear. Or if they heard, they couldn't come. Couldn't risk masses' wrath to save one girl already condemned. Time stopped having meaning. Was it minutes? Hours? The darkness was so complete she couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. She tried to count heartbeats to keep track of time, but they were coming too fast, irregular, panicked. Her chest felt tight, like the air was already running out even though she knew, somewhere in the rational part of her mind that wasn't screaming, that there must be small gaps in the wood for air to seep through. Otherwise, she'd already be dead. The heat was terrible. Georgia summer sun beating down on the wooden lid, turning the box into an oven. Sweat poured off her in rivers. Her dress stuck to her skin. Her mouth went dry as cotton, tongue thick and useless. She wanted to cry but had no tears left. Her body was conserving every drop of moisture just to survive. Then came the sounds from outside. Muffled, distant but hearable. Children playing in the quarters, women singing work songs as they prepared the evening meal, the crack of Pike's whip somewhere in the fields. Life was going on. The world was still turning, and she was buried in it, forgotten, left to rot. Night must have fallen. The heat eased slightly and the sounds changed to crickets and nightbirds. Dinah could hear folks moving around the quarters, settling in for sleep. She wondered if Sister Ruth was praying for her, if Solomon was plotting some impossible rescue, if anyone was thinking about her at all, or if they'd already begun the work of forgetting, the way you had to forget in order to survive this life. In the darkness, her mind started playing tricks. She saw her mama's face, or thought she did, heard her voice singing that African song from long ago, the one she'd sung the day they were torn apart at the auction block. The melody wrapped around Dinah like arms, like comfort, like the embrace of someone who loved her before she even knew what love was. "Mama?" Dinah whispered into the dark. "Mama, are you there?" But there was no answer. Just the silence and the suffocating weight of wood and earth and hopelessness. She must have drifted into something like sleep, though it wasn't rest, just the mind's way of escaping unbearable reality for a few moments. When she came back to herself, she didn't know how much time had passed. Could have been hours, could have been a whole day. The thirst was worse now. Her throat felt like it had been scraped with sand. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. She tried to produce spit but couldn't. Tried to swallow, but there was nothing to swallow. This, she realized, might kill her faster than anything else. Not the darkness or the confinement or even the fear, but simple thirst. The body's need for water that wouldn't be met. "Please," she whispered to whatever spirits might be listening. "Please, ancestors, don't let me die like this, not in the dark, not alone." And then, maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was the first signs of her mind breaking. She felt something. A presence. Not threatening, but not exactly comforting either. Just there, watching, waiting. In the old stories Sister Ruth told, the dead didn't always stay in their graves. Sometimes they walked between worlds, especially when one of their own was suffering. Sometimes they came to offer strength or guidance or just to remind the living that they weren't truly alone. "Who's there?" Dinah breathed into the darkness. The presence didn't answer in words, but somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with ears or hearing, she understood. This wasn't the end, this was a test. A crossroads moment where she could either break completely or find something deeper inside herself. Something stronger than fear, older than pain, more enduring than any wooden box or iron lock. Above ground, she heard footsteps, someone walking close to the box. Then Harlan's voice, slurred with whiskey and satisfaction. "You still alive in there, girl?" Dinah didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her throat was too dry, her spirit too battered. "I'll be checking on you regular," he continued, words thick and slow. "Can't have you dying too quick, that'd spoil the lesson. No, you need to last the full 35 nights. Need to feel every second of what refusal costs." He kicked the side of the box, once, twice, making the whole thing shudder. Dinah bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasted blood and earth and the bitter flavor of injustice. "Sweet dreams, Dinah," Harlan said, his laugh trailing away as he stumbled back toward the big house. And Dinah lay there in the darkness, counting her heartbeats because it was the only way to mark time, to prove she was still alive, still herself, still more than the thing Harlan wanted to reduce her to. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. 1 night down, 34 more to go. If she lasted that long, if the darkness didn't swallow her first. By the 3rd night, Dinah had learned the language of darkness. It spoke in heartbeats and breath sounds, in the creak of wood expanding with daytime heat and contracting with nighttime cool. It spoke in the scratch of insects crawling across the lid above her head, in the distant rumble of summer thunder that never brought rain. The thirst was a living thing now, a beast with claws that raked her throat every time she tried to swallow. Her tongue was swollen, her lips cracked so deep they wouldn't stop bleeding. On the 2nd day, she'd heard rain falling outside, heard it drumming on the wooden lid just inches above her face, and she'd wept at the cruelty of it. Water everywhere and not a drop to drink. She'd licked the wood where condensation formed, desperate for any moisture, but it was never enough, never close to enough. But Sister Ruth had thought of this. Bless her ancient soul, she'd thought ahead. On the 1st night, after the crowd dispersed and darkness fell, Dinah heard scraping sounds near the box. Then Ruth's voice, low and urgent. "Child, you hear me?" "Yes," Dinah croaked, voice already damaged from screaming. "I'm gonna slide something under the gap here. A hollowed reed. You put your mouth to it when I tap twice, understand?" 2 taps came. Dinah felt along the bottom edge of the box until she found it. A thin reed, barely wide enough to sip through. Ruth must have been lying flat on the ground, pressing her mouth to the other end. Then came liquid, warm, herb-tasting water mixed with something else. Honey maybe, or molasses. Just a trickle, but Lord have mercy, it was life itself. "Little bits at a time," Ruth whispered. "Every night I can risk it. But you gotta stay quiet, child. If Massa catches me..." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They both knew what happened to slaves who helped the condemned. That reed became Dinah's lifeline. Every night when the quarters settled and Harlan was drunk in the big house, Ruth would come. Sometimes she brought water, sometimes thin broth. Once a mixture that tasted like roots and earth. Rootwork medicine to keep Dinah's strength from failing completely. It wasn't much, but it was the difference between dying on day 3 and lasting to see day 7. During the daylight hours, if you could call them that in the permanent darkness, Dinah learned to count time by the sounds outside. The morning bell that called slaves to the fields. The work songs drifting on the hot breeze. The crack of Pike's whip, always followed by someone's scream. Midday silence when the heat was too brutal for even masters to push their property. Then afternoon sounds, evening prayers, night stillness. She counted in other ways too. Counted her heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, 4, until she reached 100, then started over. Counted her breaths. Counted the number of times she heard Harlan's voice outside, checking to make sure she was still alive, still suffering. He came every night like clockwork, would kick the side of the box and ask, "You ready to submit yet, Dinah?" The first few nights she didn't answer, couldn't answer. But by the 5th night she found her voice again, weak and raspy, but still hers. "No, sir." She heard him laugh. We'll see how long that pride lasts." In the darkness, memories came alive with a clarity that hurt. Dinah saw her mama again, saw her clear as if she were standing right there. Saw the auction block the moment they were torn apart, heard her mama's voice singing that African song. The memory used to bring only pain, but now, trapped in this wooden tomb, it brought something else, strength. Her mama had survived the Middle Passage, had survived being chained in the bottom of a ship for months, surrounded by death and disease and despair, had survived being sold like cattle, separated from everything she knew, and she'd still found the strength to sing, to love, to pass something sacred on to her daughter. "I come from survivors," Dinah whispered into the dark. "I come from folks who crossed the water in chains and didn't break. This box ain't nothing compared to what they endured." The words became a prayer, a mantra, a lifeline. "I come from survivors. I come from the strong ones. I come from those who knew how to bend without breaking. This box cannot hold my spirit. These nails cannot pin down my soul." On the 6th night, something changed. Dinah was counting heartbeats when she felt it. That presence again. The one she'd sensed on the first night. But this time it was stronger, more defined. She could almost see shapes in the darkness. Figures standing around the box, watching, waiting. Ancestors, maybe. Or spirits of the dead slaves buried in unmarked graves around the plantation. Or something older still. Something that came from Africa itself. That crossed the water in the hulls of slave ships and refused to die even when bodies did. "Who are you?" she whispered. The answer came not in words, but in knowing. These were her people, the ones who came before, the ones who suffered and died so she could be born. And they hadn't come to comfort her. They'd come to test her, to see if she was worthy of the strength they'd passed down through blood and bone and bitter history. "I won't break," she told them. "You hear me? I won't give him what he wants. I'd rather die in this box than submit." The presence pulsed. Approval, maybe, or acknowledgement. Then something else. A sensation like fingers brushing against her forehead. Cool fingers, gentle but firm. And with that touch came something unexpected. A vision. She saw herself not as she was now, broken and trapped, but as she would be. Saw herself climbing out of this box, skeletal and scarred but alive. Saw Harlan's face twisted with shock. Saw the red Georgia clay under her fingernails and blood on her hands. Saw freedom somehow, some way rising from this tomb, like resurrection. The vision faded, leaving her breathless and confused. Was it real? A prophecy, or just her mind breaking under the strain, manufacturing hope where none existed? By the 7th night, Dinah had changed. Her body was weakening. She could feel it in the way her muscles trembled, in the lightheadedness that came in waves. But her mind had sharpened, hardened, become something else entirely. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. Rage. Pure, righteous, ancestral rage at the injustice of it all. When Harlan came that night, drunk as usual, kicking the box and demanding submission, she answered different. "You can keep me in here till I die, massa, but my death gonna haunt you. Gonna follow you till your last breath. That's a promise, that's a conjure. That's a curse laid down by someone who ain't afraid of dying no more." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then Harlan's voice came, uncertain for the first time. "You gone crazy in there, girl?" "Maybe," Dinah said. "Or maybe I'm finally seeing clear. Maybe this darkness is showing me things your white eyes could never see. Spirits walk here, massa. The dead are watching, and they're keeping score." She heard his footsteps retreat faster than usual. Heard him mutter something under his breath. A prayer, maybe, or a curse of his own. And Dinah smiled in the darkness. She'd found her weapon, not strength of body, that was failing, but strength of spirit, of belief, of the power that comes from having nothing left to lose. And that kind of power, the old ones always said, was the most dangerous kind of all. The 2nd week brought new torments. Dinah's body was betraying her in ways she'd never imagined. Her skin, pressed against rough wood for days without moving, had developed sores that wept and festered. Her muscles, cramped in the same curled position, screamed with every tiny shift. Her hair, matted with sweat and blood from where she'd banged her head against the lid in moments of panic, had started to lock itself, tangling into knots that pulled at her scalp. But the physical pain was almost a blessing. It gave her something to focus on besides the madness that lurked at the edges of her mind, waiting to swallow her whole. On the 8th night, when Ruth came with her precious trickle of water, she whispered urgent news through the reed. "Child, folks been talking. Solomon and some of the others. They thinking about doing something, breaking you out." Dinah's heart leaped, then sank just as quick. "No," she croaked. "Tell them no. Massa would kill everyone. Would sell everyone. Ain't worth it. But you dying in there. Maybe, but I'm dying on my terms. Dying with my soul intact. You tell Solomon. Tell him save his strength for the real fight. The one that's coming someday. This here's my battle. Mine alone." Ruth was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're stronger than any of us knew. Your mama would be proud." After Ruth left, Dinah lay in the darkness and wept. Not from despair, but from the weight of knowing her suffering had meaning beyond herself. She'd become a symbol, a testament, a living proof that Massa couldn't break everyone, couldn't own everything, couldn't purchase souls no matter how many bodies he bought. By the 10th day, Dinah had started marking time on the wood itself. Her fingernails, those that hadn't broken off completely. She used to scratch lines into the inside of the lid. One line for each night survived. The wood was hard and her nails soft, so the scratches were shallow, barely visible even if there'd been light to see them by. But she could feel them with her fingertips. Evidence that she was still here, still counting, still refusing to let time swallow her without witness. She'd also begun using her own blood to mark the wood. When her lips cracked open or her sores wept, she'd catch the moisture on her fingers and draw symbols. Shapes Sister Ruth had taught her. Crosses for protection, circles for containment. Lines intersecting at odd angles. Old African marks that predated Christianity, that came from religions with names the masters had tried to erase but couldn't quite kill. The root work was working. She could feel it. The box itself was becoming consecrated space. Not a tomb, but a temple. Not a prison, but a testing ground. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. It was full of presence, power, purpose. On the 11th night, something tried to break through. Dinah was drifting in that space between sleep and waking when she heard scratching sounds from outside. Different from Ruth's careful movements, more frantic, desperate. "Hello?" she whispered. "Dinah." The voice was young, male, terrified. Jacob, the field hand who'd announced the box was ready. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I helped build this thing. I didn't understand what Massa was gonna use it for." "Hush," Dinah said gently. "Ain't your fault, child. You did what you had to do to survive. We all do." "I brought a file," Jacob whispered. "From the tool shed. I'm gonna try to file through the lock, get you out." "No!" Dinah's voice came sharp and urgent. "No, Jacob, you get caught, Massa will kill you. Or worse. You go on back, right now. But go!" She heard him crying softly, then the sound of footsteps running away. And Dinah lay there understanding something profound. Her imprisonment had become a kind of ministry. Others were finding their own strength through witnessing hers. The box wasn't just containing her. It was revealing something to everyone who saw it. Revealing the depths of Massa's cruelty, yes, but also revealing the heights of resistance that were possible even in the most impossible circumstances. By the 12th day, Dinah's mind had started playing tricks in earnest. She'd see things in the darkness, shapes that moved, faces that watched. Sometimes they were comforting, her mama singing, Ruth praying, the ancestors nodding approval. But sometimes they were terrifying. Harlan's face multiplied 100 times over, Pike's whip turning into a living snake, the wooden walls closing in tighter and tighter until there was no air left at all. She learned to talk herself through these visions, learned to say out loud, "This ain't real, the darkness is lying. My mind is tired, but I'm still here, still Dinah, still myself." The words became another kind of prayer, another way to mark time and maintain sanity in a situation designed to destroy both. On the 13th night, Harlan came drunker than usual. She could hear him stumbling, cursing, falling against the side of the box hard enough to make the whole thing shudder. "You know what, Dinah?" he slurred. "I've been thinking. 35 nights might not be enough. Might need to keep you in there longer. maybe forever. Just bored over the whole thing, leave you to rot. What you think about that? Dinah's blood ran cold, but she forced her voice steady. Then do it, Massa. But know this, every day you keep me buried, your own soul sinks deeper. You already damned. Question is just how far down you willing to go. He kicked the box viciously. Once, twice, 3 times. Each impact sent shockwaves through Dinah's battered body. Shut up! Shut your goddamn mouth! Truth hurts, don't it? Dinah heard herself say, and somewhere in the back of her mind she marveled at her own boldness. She was beyond fear now, beyond caring what happened to her body. Her spirit had found a place Massa couldn't reach no matter how deep he buried her. You think you're special? Harlan raged. Think you're better than the others? You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. Just another piece of property that forgot its place. I'm a human being, Dinah said quietly. Made in God's image, same as you. And no amount of burying can change that truth. The silence that followed was profound. Then Harlan's footsteps, staggering away. And Dinah, alone again, whispered into the darkness. 14 nights down, 21 to go. But even as she said it, she knew something had shifted. The visions she'd been having, they were becoming clearer, more insistent. The presence of the ancestors was growing stronger, and deep in her chest, in that place where knowing lives before thinking can name it, she understood. She wasn't going to last 35 nights. She was going to last longer. And when she finally emerged from this wooden tomb, she would emerge transformed. Not broken, but forged. Not defeated, but dangerous. Not a slave begging for mercy, but something else entirely. Something Harlan should have feared from the very beginning. On the 15th night, Dinah stopped counting. Not because she'd given up, but because numbers no longer mattered. Time had become something else. Not a line moving forward, but a circle, endlessly turning, each rotation bringing her closer to something she couldn't yet name but could feel approaching like thunder before a storm. Her body was failing in earnest now. The sores had spread, become infected. Fever came and went in waves that left her shaking and delirious. Her muscles had atrophied so much that she wondered if she'd even be able to walk if they finally let her out. But her mind, Lord have mercy, her mind had never been clearer. In them days of deep sorrow, clarity comes at a price, and Dinah was paying it in blood and bone and the slow dissolution of everything she'd once thought defined her. The girl who'd been dragged to this box, proud, defiant, terrified. That girl had died somewhere around day 10. What remained was something harder, something forged in darkness like steel in a blacksmith's fire. On the 16th day, she heard children's voices near the box. The quarter's young ones playing some game that took them close to Massa's terrible teaching tool. One of them, a little girl, maybe 5 summers old, started singing. The voice was high and sweet and pure, untouched yet by the full weight of what her life would become. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. The song pierced through Dinah like a lance of light through darkness. She'd heard it hundreds of times at Hush Harbor, understood its double meaning about escaping through rivers to confuse tracking dogs. But hearing it now, from a child's innocent mouth, it became something else. A promise. A prophecy. A reminder that even in the deepest waters, God could trouble them, could stir them up, could part them, could transform drowning into deliverance. Dinah opened her cracked lips and sang along, voice barely a whisper. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. The children fell silent, spooked maybe by the sound of a voice coming from what they'd been told was a tomb. Then they ran, their footsteps scattering like frightened birds. But the song lingered, took root in Dinah's chest, became fuel for the fire that was building there. That night, when Ruth came with her reed and her precious water, she brought news that changed everything. Massa's getting worse, child, drinking heavier, talking to himself. Pike says he's having nightmares, waking up screaming about ghosts and curses. Some of the house slaves say they hear him crying in the night, begging forgiveness from someone who ain't there. Dinah absorbed this information slowly. He's breaking, she whispered. Not me, him. Seems like it, Ruth agreed. The overseer's worried. Says Massa ain't fit to run the plantation much longer. Been neglecting business, letting crops suffer. All 'cause he's obsessed with what's in this box. Good, Dinah said and meant it. Let him suffer, let him know what it feels like to be haunted by your own cruelty. After Ruth left, Dinah lay in the darkness and smiled. A terrible smile, hungry and cold. She'd been practicing something, a thing Sister Ruth had taught her years back but she'd never had cause to use. Conjure words, power words. The kind that could reach through wood and earth and distance to touch a person's mind, plant seeds that would grow into madness. Every time Harlan came to the box now, and he came more frequently, driven by some compulsion he couldn't name, Dinah would speak. Not pleas for mercy, not begging, just quiet words that slithered into his ears like snakes. Your wife didn't die of fever, did she, Massa? She died of loneliness, of knowing what kind of man she'd married. And now her spirit walks these halls looking for justice. The slaves you've killed over the years, you think they're gone? They're here, Massa, standing right behind you, watching, waiting. Every child sold away remembers. Every woman forced remembers. Every man whipped to death remembers. And memory don't die, Massa, it just waits. She could hear the effect in his voice when he responded. The tremor, the uncertainty, the fear creeping in like rot in old wood. The hunter was becoming the haunted. The master was becoming the mastered. And Dinah, trapped in darkness, had found a power that no chain could bind. By the 19th day, strange things were happening on the plantation. Folks whispered about it in the quarters, and Dinah heard their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Massa swears he saw his dead wife in the hallway. Pike found him this morning, curled up in a corner crying like a child. Says he hears singing at night, singing in African tongues. The horses won't go near the big house anymore. Act spooked, like they sensed something evil. Dinah listened and understood. The boundary between worlds was thinning. The ancestors she'd called to, the spirits she'd invoked with her blood-marked symbols and her conjure words, they were answering. Not to save her necessarily, but to exact a price. To remind Massa that some things couldn't be owned, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be buried deep enough to silence. On the 21st night, Harlan came to the box different. Not drunk this time. Sober, terrified, desperate. He pressed his face against the wood and whispered, "What did you do to me? What curse did you lay?" Dinah's voice came cold as January ground. "No curse, Massa. Just truth. Truth you've been running from your whole life. The dead are speaking. Can you hear them?" "Make it stop." His voice cracked, broke. "Please, I'll let you out, It's too late," Dinah interrupted. "You set this in motion when you built this box, when you thought you could bury conscience along with body. But conscience don't die, Massa. It just waits. And now it's come collecting." She heard him sobbing. Actual tears, actual broken sounds from a man who'd never shown mercy to anyone. Part of her wanted to feel pity, but that part had died somewhere around day 12. What remained knew only this. Sometimes the oppressed must become the oppressor's nightmare. Sometimes survival means making yourself more terrifying than the terror that seeks to destroy you. 21 nights, Dinah said into his weeping. 14 more to go. And every one of them, Massa, you gonna hear me, gonna feel me, gonna know that some things can't be buried no matter how deep you dig. His footsteps staggered away, and Dinah lay back against the wood, exhausted but exultant. The tide was turning, the power was shifting, and when that 35th night finally came, when he opened this box expecting to find a broken woman ready to submit, he was going to discover something else entirely. Something that would make him wish he'd never learned her name. The final stretch of captivity brought Dinah to the edge of death and beyond. Her body had become something unrecognizable, skeletal, covered in festering sores, muscles so wasted she could barely move her limbs. When Ruth brought water now, Dinah could barely swallow. Her throat had closed up partway, her tongue was thick and useless, her lips so cracked they were more wound than flesh. But her spirit, Lord of Glory, her spirit had grown monstrous and mighty. On the 22nd night, Dinah had a vision so vivid it couldn't be denied. She saw the future clear as spring water. Harlan opening the box, reaching in to pull out what he expected would be a broken woman. But instead of submission, he'd find her hands, skeletal but strong, wrapping around his wrist. Saw him stumbling backward in shock and fear. Saw the lock that he'd forgotten to secure completely in his drunken obsession. Saw the lid opening from the inside. Saw his face, twisted with terror, as he realized too late what he'd created. The vision didn't come from nowhere. Dinah had been listening, learning, planning. Every night when Harlan came to the box, she'd been studying him. The rhythm of his footsteps, the patterns of his visits, the way his hands shook when he worked the lock. She'd noticed something crucial. In his deteriorating mental state, he'd become careless. The first week, he'd been meticulous about securing the lock. But by the third week, driven by nightmares and guilt and whatever spirits were haunting him, he'd started making mistakes. 2 nights ago, she'd heard it clearly, the lock clicking but not quite catching. The sound was different. Not the solid chunk of metal meeting metal securely, but a looser, uncertain click that spoke of hasty, trembling fingers. Dinah had tested it carefully, pressing upward on the lid with what little strength remained in her arms. There was give. Not much, but enough to plant a seed of possibility. Now she lay in the darkness, conserving every ounce of energy, and planned. The plan required patience, the kind of patience her ancestors had perfected during the Middle Passage, during centuries of bondage, during lifetimes of waiting for the right moment to strike. It required her to appear weaker than she was, more broken than she'd become. It required her to let Harlan believe his torture had worked, that he'd won, that she was ready to submit. On the 24th night, she began the performance. When Harlan came, she didn't respond with conjure words or threats. Instead, she moaned, weak, pitiful sounds that would make him think death was close. "Please," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Please. I can't. No more." She heard him pause, heard the change in his breathing. He wanted to believe it, wanted to believe he'd finally broken her. "You ready to submit?" he asked, voice eager. "Ready to give me what I wanted?" Dinah let silence hang for a long moment. Then, "Yes. Yes, sir. Anything. Just let me out. Please." The lie tasted like poison on her tongue, but she forced it out, forced herself to sound defeated, destroyed, desperate, and she heard him respond exactly as she'd hoped, with satisfaction, with relief, with the loosening of vigilance that comes when predators think they've finally cornered their prey. "5 more nights," he said almost gently. "Just 5 more nights to make sure the lesson sticks. Then I'll let you out, and you'll come to the big house willing, won't you?" "Yes, sir," Dinah whispered. "Willing." She heard him walk away humming, actually humming, like he'd just received good news. And Dinah lay in the darkness, that terrible smile returning to her cracked lips. Let him believe, let him get careless, let him think he'd won. The quarters were changing too. Sister Ruth brought word of it in whispers. "Folks are watching Massa lose his mind, child. Some scared. But others are seeing something they never thought they'd see. A white man brought low, brought down by his own cruelty. By the power of a black woman he tried to bury." "Is Solomon still planning?" Dinah asked. "Planning what?" "Freedom, escape, whatever it is I know he's been thinking about." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then, "He says when you come out of that box, if you come out, it's going to be a sign. Says the ancestors are speaking through you. Says change is coming." Dinah absorbed this. She'd become more than herself. Had become symbol, omen, prophecy. The weight of it should have been crushing, but instead it felt like wings. By the 28th night, Dinah had tested the lock 3 more times. Each time she'd felt it give a little more. Harlan's visits had become erratic, sometimes twice a night, sometimes not at all. When he did come, he was either roaring drunk or stone sober and terrified, begging her to make the haunting stop, to call off whatever curse she'd laid on him. 5 days, massa, Dinah would whisper in her false, weak voice. 5 more days and you can have what you want. Just make it stop. Make the pain stop. She was playing him like an instrument, and he was too far gone to realize it. On the 30th night, everything aligned. Harlan came stumbling to the box, drunker than she'd ever heard him. His hands fumbled with the lock. She could hear him cursing, dropping the key, picking it up again. When he finally got it open, he pressed his face against the wood and slurred, 5 more nights, Dinah, then you're mine. Body and soul. Say it. Body and soul, Dinah repeated, putting every ounce of false submission into the words. Good girl, he mumbled. Then she heard him trying to secure the lock, heard the key sliding in, turning part way, then nothing. He'd forgotten to turn it completely. In his drunken state, he'd left it unlocked. Dinah's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, planning for, surviving for. But she forced herself to wait, forced herself to lie still and silent as his footsteps staggered away, forced herself to count to 100, then 100 again, making sure he was truly gone. Then, with muscles that screamed in agony, with arms that shook like leaves in November wind, she pushed. The lid resisted at first. Nails still held it. Wood had swollen tight. But the lock wasn't engaged. The mechanism that would have held it secure wasn't there. She pushed harder, felt something give, pushed again. One nail popped loose, then another. The sound was like thunder to her ears. Surely someone would hear, would come running, would stop what was about to happen. But no one came. The quarters were silent except for the usual night sounds. Crickets, distant dogs, the moan of wind through cotton fields. Dinah pushed one more time with everything she had left. The lid shifted, opened a crack. Night air, sweet Georgia night air, thick with humidity and the scent of earth, rushed in. She gasped, lungs filling with it, tears streaming down her ruined face. Freedom. Almost. But not yet. Not quite yet. Because she had one more thing to do before she left this wooden tomb. One more debt to settle. One more piece of justice to claim. She lay back down, leaving the lid slightly ajar, and waited. Waited for the 35th night. Waited for Harlan to come back, expecting to pull out a broken woman ready to submit. Instead, he was going to find something else. Something that had learned patience in darkness. Something that had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. The 35th night came with a blood moon hanging low in the Georgia sky. Red as clay, red as wounds, red as the justice that was long overdue. Dinah lay in her partially opened coffin, breathing the night air that had become her lifeline, and waited. Her body was a ruin. Skeletal, scarred, barely human in appearance. But her mind was sharp as broken glass, and her purpose was absolute. She heard him coming long before his footsteps reached the box. Heard him singing, actually singing, some old hymn about redemption and grace, his voice thick with whiskey and anticipation. He thought this was his victory night, thought he was coming to claim his prize, to pull out a broken woman who'd finally learned her place. Sweet Jesus, how wrong he was. Dinah? His voice came closer, eager and slurred. Dinah, girl, you ready? 35 nights done, time to come out. Time to show Massa what a good, obedient woman you gonna be. He knelt beside the box. She could hear his knees hitting the red earth, could smell the whiskey sweat pouring off him. His hands fumbled with the lock, but of course it wasn't really secured. He'd forgotten, in his drunken confidence, that he'd left it loose 5 nights ago. Come on out now, he coaxed, lifting the lid part way. Come on out and... Dinah's hand shot through the opening like a snake striking. Her fingers, skeletal but strong with the strength of the desperate, the damned, the delivered, wrapped around his wrist with a grip that wouldn't break, couldn't break. Was forged from 35 nights of suffering and rage and ancestral fire. Harlan screamed, tried to pull back, but Dinah held on, used his own momentum against him, and with strength she didn't know she still possessed, She pulled him forward, off balance, tumbling toward the open box. What? No, no! His face was a mask of terror in the moonlight, eyes wide, mouth open, the realization finally dawning that he'd created something he couldn't control. Dinah used his shock, his drunkenness, his complete unpreparedness for resistance, and pulled harder. He fell forward, hands scrambling for purchase on the wooden edges, but she was already moving. With a violence born of 35 nights of torture, she dragged herself up even as she pulled him down. Their positions reversed in a moment that felt suspended in time. Him falling into the darkness that had been her hell, her emerging from it like resurrection made flesh. Harlan's scream cut through the night as he tumbled into the coffin. The space that had barely held Dinah now held him. His larger body cramped, contorted, panicking. He thrashed, tried to push himself up, but Dinah was already there, skeletal arms pushing the lid down even as he pushed up. No, Dinah, don't, I'm sorry. Sorry. The word echoed hollow in the night air. Sorry didn't bring back the 35 nights. Sorry didn't heal the scars. Sorry didn't undo the cruelty, the violation, the attempt to break her soul along with her body. Sorry ain't enough, massa, Dinah whispered, her voice like gravel, like earth, like judgment itself. Sorry don't pay what's owed. She slammed the lid down with the last of her strength, heard him screaming inside just as she'd screamed, felt him pounding against the wood just as she'd pounded. Knew he was experiencing the first moments of that suffocating darkness, that crushing terror, that absolute helplessness. The nails lay scattered on the ground where the carpenter had left them weeks ago. Dinah's hands shook as she picked up the first one, positioned it against the wood, found a rock, not a hammer, but it would do. Brought it down. Bang! Harlan's scream intensified. Bang, 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 please, Dinah, let me out, I'll free you, I'll give you papers. You'll die, Dinah said simply, driving another nail through. Die like you wanted me to die, in darkness, in fear, in the knowledge that nobody's coming to save you. She worked methodically, each nail a prayer, each strike a sermon. Her hands bled. Her body screamed in agony, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person he'd brutalized, every soul he'd tried to own, every life he'd treated as less than human. When the last nail was driven, she sat back, gasping. Inside the box, Harlan was still screaming, still begging, his voice already hoarse with terror. She picked up handfuls of red Georgia clay and began to cover the box. Not completely. Not enough to kill him immediately. Just enough to muffle the sound. Just enough to make him feel the weight of earth closing in. How long you gonna leave me in here? His muffled voice cried out. How long? Dinah leaned close to the wood and whispered, as long as it takes, massa. As long as it takes for you to understand. Maybe forever, maybe just until the air runs out. The ancestors will decide. Not me. She stood then, or tried to. Her legs wouldn't hold her at first. 35 days without standing, without walking, had left her barely able to move. But she forced herself up, using the box itself for support, and looked around the quarters. Faces appeared in doorways, shadowy figures emerging from cabins, drawn by the commotion. Sister Ruth came running, hands covering her mouth in shock and recognition. Solomon stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief and something like awe. Even Pike the overseer, attracted by the screams, stood at a distance, too stunned to move. And Dinah, skeletal, scarred, more ghost than woman, stood above the buried massa and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Whoever tries to dig him up will answer to me, and the spirits that walk with me. This is justice. This is payment. This is the debt collected. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Harlan's muffled screaming from beneath the earth and wood. Dinah took one step away from the box, then another. Her legs trembled, threatened to give out. But Sister Ruth was there suddenly, supporting her, guiding her toward the cabins. Come, child, Ruth whispered. Come away, let the night take what the night is owed. As they walked away, Dinah leaning heavily on Ruth's strong back, The screaming continued behind them. How long it lasted, nobody would say for certain. Some folks claimed it went on for hours, others said days. But eventually, like all screams, it stopped, and the box that had been meant to bury Dinah's spirit became instead a tomb for the man who tried to break it. Now listen here, children, because this is where the story gets handed down from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, and some details get blurred by time while others get sharper. What happened to Dinah after that blood moon night? Well, that depends on who's telling it. Some folks swear she left the very next morning. Say Solomon and a handful of others helped her to the edge of the plantation, gave her what little food and water they could spare, pointed her north toward the drinking gourd. They say she followed the Underground Railroad, that network of safe houses and brave conductors who risked everything to guide freedom seekers to the promised land. Say she made it all the way to Pennsylvania, then Canada, where she lived out her days free, telling her story to anyone who'd listen, showing the scars on her body as proof that suffering can be survived, that cruelty can be overcome. Others tell it different. Say Dinah never left at all. Say her body was too broken from those 35 nights to travel far, so she stayed in the quarters, becoming something between woman and spirit. Say she lived in the shadows of that plantation for years, decades maybe, haunting the place where she'd been buried alive, making sure no other master ever forgot what happened when you tried to own a soul that refused to be owned. The truth, as always, probably lives somewhere between the stories. What we know for certain is this: Harlan's body was found 3 days later. Pike, the overseer, finally brave enough to approach the box, uncovered it, and broke the lock. What he found inside made him vomit in the red Georgia clay. A man who'd clawed his own face bloody, who'd screamed himself voiceless, who'd died in the darkness he'd created for another. The authorities came, of course. White men with badges and questions and assumptions. They arrested Pike, thinking he'd done it. Arrested Solomon, thinking rebellion was brewing. Questioned every slave on the plantation, looking for confession, for guilt, for someone to punish. But nobody talked. Not one soul gave Dinah's name. Not one mouth spoke the truth of what happened that 35th night. The code of silence that governed slave quarters, that network of whispers and protected secrets that Massa could never penetrate, held firm as iron. Eventually, they ruled it an accident. Said Harlan must have been checking on his teaching box while drunk, fallen in somehow, and gotten trapped. Case closed. Plantation sold to settle debts. Slaves scattered to other plantations across the South, carrying the story with them like seeds that would sprout wherever they were planted. And Dinah? Well now, let me tell you what really matters about Dinah. Whether she died in those quarters or made it north to freedom, whether she lived 10 more years or 50, the truth is this: Dinah became immortal the moment she climbed out of that coffin. Not her body, that remained as mortal as anyone's, but her story, her spirit, her refusal to be broken. That became something that couldn't die. In the years that followed, when slaves across the South faced impossible odds and crushing oppression, they'd whisper her name. "Remember Dinah," they'd say. "Remember the woman who spent 35 nights in a coffin and came out stronger than the man who put her there." When women were cornered by masters demanding what couldn't freely be given, they'd think of Dinah's no, that one word that cost everything but preserved something more valuable than life itself. When men were beaten down and told to submit, to accept their lot, to believe they were less than human, they'd remember, even in the darkest box, even in the deepest suffering, the human spirit can remain unbroken. Sister Ruth, who lived to see the day of Jubilee when freedom finally came, would tell Dinah's story to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She'd show them the place where the box had been buried, though by then it was long gone, the earth reclaimed and unmarked. "This ground drank tears and blood," Ruth would say, "but it also witnessed resurrection, witnessed a woman decide her soul was worth more than her survival. And that choice, that sacred, terrible, powerful choice, it changed something. Maybe not the whole world, maybe not even the whole plantation, but it changed something inside everyone who saw it. Made us remember we were human beings, made us remember we had power, even in powerlessness. Solomon did eventually escape, made it north through the Underground Railroad, became a speaker at abolition meetings, told Dinah's story to audiences of white folks who needed to understand what slavery really meant. Not in abstract terms of economics and politics, but in the lived experience of bodies buried alive, of souls refusing to die, of women who'd rather perish than submit. And in the decades that followed, through Civil War and Reconstruction, through Jim Crow and the long struggle for true freedom, Dinah's story persisted. Got told in different ways, with different details, sometimes mixed up with other tales of resistance. But the core remained: a woman, a coffin, 35 nights, and a reversal so complete it bordered on the miraculous. The old ones say that on certain nights, when the moon hangs red and low, when the air is thick with Georgia humidity, you can still hear sounds near where that plantation used to be. Not screaming exactly, more like singing. A woman's voice, strong and clear, singing those old spirituals that carried coded messages of freedom. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. And sometimes, they say, you can hear another sound underneath. A pounding. A desperate, futile pounding on wood that won't give, won't break, won't offer mercy to those who showed none. Now me, I'm just an old storyteller. Just someone who carries the memories that books won't hold and histories won't record. But I'll tell you what I believe. Dinah lives, not in body, that's long since returned to earth, but in every person who refuses to be broken, in every soul that chooses dignity over survival, in every heart that says no even when no might cost everything. She lives in the knowledge that oppressors cannot truly own what matters most, cannot chain the spirit, cannot bury the human will to be free, cannot kill the memory of resistance. And when you hear about injustice, when you see cruelty and think there's no way to fight back, no way to resist, no way to survive with your soul intact, remember Dinah. Remember the woman who entered a coffin one person and emerged another. Remember that sometimes the only power we have is the power to refuse, to say no, to maintain our humanity even when everything is designed to strip it away. The quarters are gone now. The plantation is gone, the masters and the overseers and all the apparatus of that terrible system. Gone, or at least transformed into something less obviously brutal. But the lessons remain. The memories remain. The stories remain. And we tell them, Lord have mercy, we tell them. Because memory is the only immortality we've got. Because if we forget, if we let these stories die, then all that suffering means nothing. But if we remember, if we keep speaking these truths, then every person who endured, who resisted, who refused to be broken, they live on. Quem sofreu, sofreu. Quem resistiu, deixou memória. E memória a gente guarda aqui, nas echoes from the quarters. The chains may rust, child, but the memory don't. And justice, justice, sometimes it comes dressed in wood and nails, and the fierce determination of a woman who decided that death was better than submission. Sometimes it comes from the last place you'd expect, from inside a coffin, where someone you tried to bury was busy digging your grave instead. Remember that. Remember Dinah. And when the world tries to put you in a box, any kind of box, remember, the lid can always be opened from the inside. If you're willing to pay the price, if you're willing to believe, if you're willing to let the ancestors guide your hands and the rage of the righteous fuel your strength. That's the legacy. That's the inheritance that don't die. That's Dinah of the coffin, the woman who was buried alive and chose to bury her oppressor instead. May her memory be a blessing and a warning. May her spirit walk with all who resist. May her story never be forgotten. Amen and amen again.